Hello and welcome. I'm Uday Pratap Singh. You're with us live on NewsX. Our big focus on the broadcast. China's Shanghai is going through a strict lockdown under China's COVID-0 policy. People are being dragged to the quarantine centers. Pets are being thrown in plastic bags. Children are taken away from parents and civilians face an extreme shortage of food. With all said and done, Shanghai is the largest business city of the Dragon Nation. China's economy is suffering largely from this total lockdown. The retail sales have registered a fall of 3.5%, while unemployment has risen by 5.8%. Meanwhile, over 600 companies have shut down their operations in the city as the consumer prices rose by 2.2%. With the total lockdown still in place and no sight of it being pulled off, what will be the impact on the economy and will the nation be able to recover? Joining us at this point is Gautam Mukherjee, senior journalist. We also have Dr. P.S.V. Rao, consultant surgeon, Manipal Hospital, Hebbal, Bengaluru, joining us live. Akash Jindal, senior economist, is live with us. Dr. Shrikant Kondapalli, China and foreign policy expert, joins us live. Sharat Kohli, senior economist, is also live with us on the broadcast. Dr. Kondapalli, let me begin with you first. Cases are going down in Shanghai, but this draconian lockdown continues. Why? And what is its continued and sustained impact going to be?
I think the major impact is in terms of the confidence in Shanghai. I lived in Shanghai for a while when I was studying there and frequently did visit. It generally bounces back from all the controversies or other major hurdles. For example, in the 1960s, there was the Cultural Revolution, which the city bounced back. And then Tiananmen Square in 1989. Jiang Zemin was the mayor of a party secretary of Shanghai, and it bounced back. And so many of these crisis situations before Shanghai did bounce back, which suggests that there is that kill factor that Shanghai does exhibit in 1949, 60s, 80s, and in the 90s, those who controlled Shanghai controlled China. That was the political kind of message that, in fact, even Xi Jinping served in Shanghai for a brief while as party secretary. So that's in terms of the overall bouncing back of Shanghai. But this situation is unheard of. The previous calamities did not touch Shanghai like this one in terms of the double lockdown situation. So this is a very unprecedented issue. Previous ones were political protests or others, but this time the whole of the city getting locked down is unheard of with 25 million people. So its impact is on the economy as the city sustains something like nearly 4% of the GDP of the country. And so with so many developments that have happened, for example, the dual circulation strategy that was implemented in the current 14th five-year plan, and secondly, in terms of the major economic reforms, such as the Common Prosperity Program that Xi Jinping initiated, and that resulted in a lot of restrictions on e-commerce platforms, Meituan, food hailing, car hailing apps, and others. So it has actually kind of brought in Shanghai to a major crisis situation before. So the COVID-19 zero COVID policy resulted in a complete shutdown of Shanghai. And created so much of loss of confidence among the people. That is, I think, the major lesson, direction that has been brought about, which is impacting also on supply chain mechanisms, because Putung Special Economic Zone in Shanghai is the major supply chain mechanism across the globe, and most of the ships are stranded in Shanghai because of the lockdown situation, and this has resulted in a major problematic in the overall supply chain mechanism. As you remember, last year, India, Japan, Australia have initiated the Supply Chain Resilience Initiative to move away from China and Shanghai in particular, because the Chinese tried to diversify from Hong Kong to Shanghai during the reform program. It's a deliberate move to reduce the Hong Kong influence. But today, with this COVID, both in Hong Kong as well as in Shanghai, we see a lot of supply chain disruptions happening. So this is a major impact that I could see quickly on this. But of course, as you mentioned, unemployment and e-commerce platforms, JD.com is laying off its labor, its workers, staff. Many of the e-commerce platforms which were thriving before have laid off their staff because of the situation in Shanghai. So this is a major problematic from the economy, life, and others. Some of my students still there, they suggest that it is really getting horrible in the city.
But Dr. PSV Rao, does a COVID-0 policy really work? With cases going down, is such a draconian lockdown really medically speaking needed?
As I've written in the Sunday Guardian last Sunday, the zero COVID policy has not worked. Actually, in the beginning, many island nations adopted it, not only China, but Taiwan, New Zealand, Australia, and of course, the Vietnam and also like South Korea also adopted it. But soon they realized, especially with the later variants, which are very transmissible, that there was no way they could totally stamp out the this variants and the virus. You can't have a situation where you say that something like smallpox or polio, you are done away with it. It is not there anymore. And this is a virus which is going to survive like the earlier coronaviruses and the influenza viruses. Only thing is, if most of the population is immunized, either naturally or by vaccines, then what happens is the transmission, the R factor goes down to less than 1. That means the R factor decides as to how many people are going to be infected by each infected person. So as long as it is not 1 or less, that means one person will only infect one other person. There won't be a chain reaction where there will be a sudden massive wave. And hence the infection will survive, the virus will survive, but it will affect a person here, a person there, and it won't affect the economy and the general health of the entire public. But if you are going to have a high R factor, like now, last few days, the R factor in Delhi for the new variant has gone beyond 2. That is when you need to start being concerned. So in China, what has happened is the R factor is much higher. The infection has spread like hell, whereas Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, and South Korea, etc., have finally given up on the zero COVID policy. China still persists, and Xi and his government has invested so much of their resources, manpower, and their reputation on the zero COVID policy, and they are being so rigid about it, as they often are, that they are actually losing out. Their economy is getting hit, and like I mentioned in my article, this treatment is worse than the disease. So you can't go on with this. The other governments realized it, they gave up. What we need is a flexible policy. Now that we have, initially you needed a proper lockdown because you didn't have the vaccines. You had no way of immunizing your public. Now that there are vaccines and effective, of course the Chinese vaccines have not proved effective, but if you vaccinate your public on a large scale, and you accept the fact there will be a few cases here and there, you don't lock down the entire economy, you don't affect the daily living of the people, you will have far more cooperation than if you try to force draconian rules and regulations. You will have eventually non-cooperation. See, these epidemiological problems need large-scale cooperation. Without the cooperation of the public, it's not going to work. And you see, many of the Western countries have had severe anti-vaccine, anti-COVID regulation protests. This is because you are unable to convince the public that you are doing something which is for their good, and convince them. So zero COVID is not going to work. You will have to have a flexible COVID policy where you try and vaccinate as many people as possible, try to encourage them to use COVID appropriate behavior, and reach out and accept the fact that there will be cases, and you don't need to catch the entire population and keep testing them like the Chinese are doing. What is the big idea of testing the entire Shanghai population 3 times? You are just making life miserable for everyone. Take it easy, accept the fact it will be there, and try and vaccinate as many people, and try to encourage people to follow the policy. That kind of a flexible policy is what is going to work. It has worked elsewhere, and it can work for China, provided that Xi and his government accepts the fact that there are better ways of doing things. This is the problem there. They are not willing to accept.
Okay. Yes. Sharat Kohli, come in here on the kind of impact all of this is having on the Chinese economy. Prices going very, very high, unemployment numbers going high. What is the impact these kind of draconian measures are having on the, on business in Shanghai, but on the overall Chinese economy as well?
Well, Uday, not just Chinese economy. This is going to, because Shanghai is the busiest port in China. So not just in the Chinese economy, this is going to impact the other economies as well. In fact, to a certain extent, India as well, because a lot of Indian imports from China are happening via the Shanghai port. Now, this is, Uday, a classic case of kill the patient, not the disease. I call it as COVID torture, actually, the way the videos which are playing on your screen and what we keep hearing through social media and other places, because you never get an official or a formal kind of information from the Chinese media, from the Chinese government, and so on and so forth. As far as the economic impact is concerned, I think if you go for a draconian lockdown where you do not allow people to get down from the apartment on the street, what can you expect? You expect complete breakdown of the supply chains. Even if you decide, to open an emergency store or a daily provision store or a departmental store or a supermarket for that matter, who's going to buy from there? First of all, you don't allow that. Even if you allow, when you don't allow people to get down, you don't allow people to come down with their pets. What do you expect? You expect complete breakdown, shortage of goods. People are starving. I mean, the video which played on your screen, which said a woman jumped from the apartment out of starvation and the husband cried helplessly, I think it clearly explains the situation, that it's a desperate situation which they have created. I think, Uday, they are getting a taste of their own medicine. I call this virus the Wuhan virus. The world may call it coronavirus. Ultimately, we have to name it after the place where it originated from. I think they're getting a taste of their own medicine. And I think the method they are using to curtail the virus is the method which the world used. Now, what surprises me is that if you remember when COVID came in 2020, the economies one after the other declared lockdowns. Even India went through. You remember the 23rd of March 2020 when the Prime Minister came on the television, announced a lockdown, a complete lockdown. We had almost a curfew-like situation. Suddenly the air had become pure, the waters were clean. You remember that scenario. I think, but as with the flux of time over the next 2 years, the economies, big economies like America, like India, like Europe realized that this is not the way to curtail this virus. You will have to live with this virus. Second, at least let the livelihoods sustain. So I think China, what it did was, in the recent lockdown, it either did not want to notice what the world did for the last 2 years. Obviously, I'm leaving out March and April of 2020. It completely ignored that there was a method behind curtailing the virus, that you declare containment zones, you restrict the areas where you are finding the cases, but do not, for God's sake, lock the entire economy. Otherwise, you're going to, if they say you should learn from mistake of others, nobody lives long enough to do all the mistakes by himself or herself and then learn. I think China did not learn from the initial mistake done by the economies. It did not learn. It went for a very strict lockdown, and the impact is that unemployment, the impact is shortage of goods, the impact is inflation, and now, the worst, in fact, Uday, which is going to come is the cascading effect on rest of the world, because China, in some way or the other, whether we love it or we hate it, it is still world's factory. there's a lot of manufacturing activity which happens in China around Shanghai. I think Professor Kontipalli would be able to relate to what I am saying. There's a lot of manufacturing, not in Shanghai, some parts of Shanghai, but in the area surrounding Shanghai, there's a lot of manufacturing activity, sector-based manufacturing activity which goes on. And the way it happens is that the products manufactured from those factories straight away arrive at the Shanghai port from where they are exported. In fact, I can tell you in the Indian context, there is a place in Delhi called Sadar Bazaar. And I was talking to a traders association yesterday in Sadar Bazaar. What they said is that they are okay for the next, let's say, 3 to 4 weeks. But if this goes beyond 3 to 4 weeks, there's a lot of disruption which is going to be caused, not just in India, but all those countries who still substantially depend on Chinese imports. So I think imagine sunflower oil and wheat coming from Ukraine and Russia. Very, in terms of the number of products, very small number of products. In terms of country size or in terms of country size of exports, very small. But China is a behemoth. I mean, China is huge. So you can imagine. I mean, I don't know what logic China has behind locking down. It is not worried about its own economy. I mean, the measures which China took over the last 2 years, banning its rich people, closing down big companies, preventing IPOs and so and so. So this is going to be a double whammy. You block the normal economy as well. I think you will have to bear the brunt of this disruption for a very long time. And I am my fear is that the rest of the world will also have to bear the brunt, Uday, for in the times to come. Over to you.
Yes, Akash Jindal, come in here on on the impact all of this is having on one of the busiest business cities of Asia, a financial hub of Shanghai, but also the impact this will have on the global economy, which is obviously the last thing we need, looking at the Russia-Ukraine war and the already devastating impact of the last 2 years of COVID.
You're right today. See, I was listening to all my good friends and colleagues, and I have respect for each and every word they've said. Now, talking about Russia-Ukraine war, as you have rightly said, and we have been regularly discussing it on your channel and other channels, that it has caused problem for the entire global economy, entire world economy. Yes, you're right. But on the same hand, now for the past 1 week, the stories we are doing is that Russia-Ukraine war, when it has caused problems for all economies, including India, it has also a silver lining. Now we are in the process of exporting wheat to Egypt, which was not importing wheat from India. Now they have cleared Indian wheat that is quality wheat, and we are in the process of exporting it to it. So I think China, what they are doing to contain coronavirus is what China always does. I mean, this is the way Chinese operate in all sorts of things, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's any policy. This is the Chinese way of doing things. So this is how they work, and they would do that way. But what does that mean for India? I think for India, it means, of course, the economy is going to get impacted. But for India, it means a great opportunity for becoming a manufacturing giant, to have more manufacturing bases in India, to do more exports, to have more FDI into India, and an opportunity for us to utilize this time and become a big manufacturing economy. Chinese are going to do what they always do. They have been doing this. Now China, the sort of problem they are suffering from. GDP growth, we all know. They are trying to get 5% GDP growth, whereas this year, global agencies are telling that India is going to get 8 to 9% GDP growth. Now, we have done many prudent moves. We had a FTA with Australia. We are in the advanced stage of signing an FTA with UK. Now, China has been more into multilateral agreements, whereas we have been much more wisely into bilateral trade agreements, which are going to prove much more practical. So I think India should utilize this opportunity for becoming a greater manufacturing power, for getting more FDI into the country, for taking the concept of Make in India forward, Make in India, make for the world, and trying to become, of course, I know that in 1 month, we can't do that, but this is an opportunity for us to go ahead with things to make India a bigger economy, a stronger economy, a more mature manufacturing economy, because we all would agree to this thing that in the past 2 months, India's position in the globe is increased. In Russia-Ukraine war also, we have played a very prudent role. We have placed ourselves in a very prudent manner, and we are having relations with Russia as well as US. So I think India must utilize this opportunity to the fullest. And of course, this is China virus. There are no two views. This originated from China. So China is getting impacted from something which originated in China itself. So I won't go beyond this, but yes, definitely, I think it's a good opportunity for India because we, end of the day, are a democratic country. And I'm almost endorsing what all my friends have said, that we always deal in a much more practical way with things and problems. Of course, initially we had a lockdown. That time in 20, it was something which was new to the entire world. So the entire world was trying to learn how to deal with that pandemic, but we have been more practical. We have always been more democratic. We know how to deal with problems. So I think this is a time when India should utilize this opportunity. India should try getting ahead because Shanghai is going to impact China's economy because China's GDP growth is going to get impacted. Now, China, if we start counting the problems right from the 2 years ago when we had a US-China trade war which lasted around 22 months, it had an impact on China's economy. Then, of course, big corporates having debt problems, entire China having debt problems. Then we had problems with the government taking action against big businessmen, many other problems, then the issue of ghost towns. So I think China's problems are never ending, and the message is clear for India that this is India's turn to go ahead with more manufacturing, go ahead with GDP growth, practical decisions, practical things where we can go ahead. And since we are having a better reputation in the entire world, much, much better than China, we should utilize that, become a big manufacturing economy. The concept of Make in India should be taken to a higher level. And what I'm learning in the past 2 weeks, there are many FDI proposals which can get into India. That should be utilized to do more manufacturing, more export out of India. And around 25 days ago, there was a data which told that India has achieved a great landmark in exports. Now we are into defense manufacturing also in a bigger way, defense exports also. So I think the issue is quite clear. China would do what China always does, but India, being a more practical country, should utilize the opportunity to the best.
Gautam Mukherjee, there is obviously resistance building up as well. People in China and Shanghai are not happy with these kind of draconian measures. They're trying to speak out, but they're obviously being censored and literally being dragged and beaten up if they go out onto the streets, which is why they've been screaming from windows and trying to put out whatever they can in a sort of a small step that perhaps the world will notice and do something.
Well, Uday, the process, the political thinking in the Xi administration seems to be to try and knock this virus on the head as soon as possible. Being a totalitarian state, they have taken measures like this where they lock the entire place down, 25 million people. It is having an impact on the quarterly GDP of about 0.5%. They are projected to lose 0.5% for 2 quarters running. Now, I think what Xi is trying to do is not make it for the full year. That's one way of, trying to control this whole thing. The other is, as the doctor said, that you cannot really, whatever you do, completely knock out a virus. You have to live with it, and economic activity should be allowed to continue. Now, in the process of all this, from the Indian point of view, we have had unprecedented agricultural exports. We've had exports in general reaching up to about 400 million. And there is every possibility of doubling this or even reaching 1 trillion in the coming future. The point about this is, everything is relative. We have to start from our base, and China, even when it comes down to 5%, is a 12, $15 trillion economy. So their, scope of works, the overall field is obviously many times bigger. The other thing, various panelists mentioned Ukraine. It appears to me that this is going to be a prolonged war. The two things are that Russia is quite determined to take what it wants, and Zelensky and the United States, today the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense are visiting. He's asking for heavy armaments to take back territory. Now, this means that he's going to keep fighting, or at least attempt to keep fighting. Russia is not going to give ground. We are not going to see a quick end to this war anytime soon. It won't go up to nuclear war, but it will affect, grains and sunflower oil at a minimum. And it is all of this between China and its slowdown, not just the virus and not just Shanghai, Shenzhen, or wherever else it may pop up next. It's calling for a reorientation of the entire world economy. Sanctions as well that have been applied to Russia, threatened further sanctions against China. All of this is reorienting the world economy. People are not getting the results that they thought they would get. You put a sanction and somebody else finds a way around it. You stop something and then there is some ghost and some kind of black marketeering effort and it gets past it. There's plenty of oil in this world, and I'm sure India, which is oil dependent to 80%, will keep on getting oil at good prices, gas at good prices from somewhere or the other. And today, being the biggest buyer next to China, America has most of its own oil and is a net exporter of oil and gas, though they're expensive. It gives us a certain leverage. It is also giving us leverage in terms of our military equipment purchases. Everybody's coming here and laying out the mantra that they want to cooperate with us on high technology defense. How this will work out, the EU person is here now, British have just gone. They're all saying the same thing. How this will work out vis-a-vis our very comfortable deals with Russia remains to be seen. But all of it suggests a reorientation of the world order to the benefit of India. I agree with all the panelists that there is an opportunity here. I don't expect miracles, but I expect a very substantial growth in all fields for India. We're looking at semiconductors, we're looking at electronics ramp up, we're looking at all sorts of componentry technology being made here. All of this can benefit in this uncertain world because we're kind of like an oasis of calm. And this will definitely be of benefit as it goes on. To what extent remains to be seen. And China has a way of bouncing back. So we have to wait for that as well.
Okay, let's leave it at that. My thanks to all of our guests for joining us on this discussion.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.